Hi, everybody. This is Sheila Kamara-Hay of Ecstatic Birth with another conversation to transform birth. And I'm really, really excited about today's conversation because this person is a dad, and I've never spoken to a dad before. I want to introduce you all to Phillip Norbury, who is the spouse of Teodora Pavlova, who we connected with in the previous conversation to transform birth. Teodora had an amazing ecstatic birth experience. She shared her story, and then Phil reached out to me and said, hey, I would love to share my side. I would love to share my perspective. Phil is a gardener. He's in training to be a Gestalt therapist. He's a writer, currently working on his second novel. Welcome, Phil. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, I was so happy to get your email, and I was a little bit like shell-shocked for myself. Like, yeah, actually, I've never spoken to a dad. This is amazing because it's got to be such a profound experience for you to be witnessing your partner, your baby being born. You know, you're really integral to the whole process, and yet you're also really holding space and supporting in a beautiful way. And so I'm curious, what was it that you experienced in the birth of your child that made you feel like, after listening to Teodora tell her side of the story, what was it that you're like, you know what, actually, I want to share my perspective too, because I have, you know, obviously a unique and very valuable perspective to share.
Just letting your question sink in.
Yeah.
Because it's a big thing to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think about the birth of my son, it was the most thrilling, beautiful, kind of scary. I'll talk about that later. Kind of nervous, scary, transformative experience of my life. And unlike a lot of things in my life, which are about me doing and trying, this was not one of those experiences. This was where I was on the edge. I was there, present, observing, kind of gently supporting, but I was witnessing something that in a way, it just wasn't about me. Yeah. But like you say, you know, I was involved, and it wouldn't be happening without me. And I felt like pretty much everything went as well as you could imagine it happening. And in some ways it was, I didn't have to do anything. We were just there. The process was unfolding by itself. And I think not just like the physiological process itself, but seeing Teodora, like what she was doing, what was happening. You know, I've never seen something like that before. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know kind of that was possible for it to be like that. It just felt totally unique. You know, even though humans have been giving birth hundreds of thousands of years, it just seemed like a completely new creation of life.
What I think is really beautiful, just hearing what you're sharing, is, you know, we get certain messages about what birth is, right? From the TV, the media, culture, from the stories that we hear from other people, but you really don't actually know what birth is until you're there, until you're in that room, until you're seeing what's happening, until you're seeing the energy of it. And to hear you say that it was one of the most transformative experiences of your life is so beautiful, because I really do hold that space, you know, for moms, for babies, and, you know, for their partners as well. I'm curious about the conceptions that you had of what the birth might be like going into it, and what actually unfolded that has you say things like, you know, I'd never seen Teodora quite in that way, or like, what were you thinking it might be like, and then what actually happened?
Well, I have to be honest and say, before she got pregnant, I really hadn't given birth much thought at all. It was just kind of there in the background, out of awareness, I guess. But the times I did think about it, it was like what you say, you know, what you see on TV and Friends, you know, Hollywood. very hospitalized, something that you endure or survive. Um, I think that's kind of how I thought about it. And then when I found out that she was pregnant, suddenly we were just having all these conversations. Suddenly it was like, this is the area we need to look at, or I need to look at. And so I turned my gaze towards pregnancy and birth. And I was very interested because it kind of really fits with psychotherapy and trying to understand where we come from and how things affect us early on. So Theodora told me her first story of her birth with Sienna. And it was like, wow, okay, I've never heard of anyone having a birth like that where the doctor didn't touch them. No one touched the baby. And maybe some of it sounded like a little bit crazy, like kind of risky. How could you, And then I started to read lots of books. I read the Ina May Guide to Childbirth. I was listening to lots of lectures from like the Ecstatic Birth world. And I found myself getting really excited in this whole other world. It was like this kind of underside of history, one of these areas you never kind of think about, and suddenly you're seeing another perspective, and it was beautiful. There were just so many like positive stories, and it was about empowering experiences, like bringing sexuality. I mean, that kind of blew my mind. And in the beginning, I was just like, what, like how are these things? But then very quickly, it just made absolute sense to me. And then, I might have some anxiety of, what happens? What if this happens? Like, are we taking a risk about this? So I need to know what happens if the baby, is upside down or whatever. So then we'd read about that. We'd do some little course, some webinar. And so I'll speak for myself. I was empowering myself through knowledge and just hearing women's experiences. It just kind of went into my ground, gave me this confidence of like, you kind of believe in this process, you give it, you commit to it. And we had decided on a home birth. We were working with a home birth team. So that was like my gateway into what we had in the end, which was a free birth. It was the home birth team. And a woman was coming out, and she was very nice. But quite quickly, I started to see these little moments, these little interactions where she'd kind of give us this look of like, why would you want to do that? Like, why are you fighting me? Or we'd want to ask about, how would it be for you if I took my clothes off and we were in the tub together and we were being sensual? And I started to feel maybe some shame or something, but that I was I don't know, shame came into the field. I don't know whether it was hers, what I was imagining she was bringing, my own, but we were having our own conversations that like, well, this is what we want to do. We want to, we want to be like this in this beautiful moment. And we realized that's actually, we were kind of really fighting against this practitioner, and we were getting very stressed. And we just thought, no, we want to do it our way. And we just want to be supported in that. We don't want to be fighting against anybody. So we made the decision to have a free birth, and felt very excited and liberated about that.
What's so brilliant about what you're saying is I heard you say in the beginning, well, I thought like, is this okay? Is this responsible? Is this safe? Right. And you really took the time to educate yourself. And I think this is a big piece of being able to surrender to the process of birth. Like sometimes people have this idea that a home birth is the right answer, like as if there is a right answer. And as I was saying to you earlier, like I'm a big advocate of like what's right for you, like really navigating that field. But if you haven't done the piece that gets your whole psyche on board, where you're really understanding and what the different pathways look like, and what happens if this happens, and what happens in that, if you don't follow those rabbit holes and just kind of like hope for the best, you could get in a lot of trouble. So I love that you really took the time to educate yourself, and within that education, started to realize, like, my God, this makes so much sense. And within that education, also started to realize like what you were desiring in terms of how you wanted to welcome your baby into the world. And I think the piece that's fascinating is this piece that you just brought up about shame, right? Because childbirth is a part of our sexuality. Of course it is. Like, that's how we make the baby. It's part of our sexuality. But we have not really, as a culture or society, integrated that idea fully into how we bring our babies forward, into how we deliver them. And I'm sure, like, as you've heard plenty of times from Theodora and the work that she's done in ecstatic birth, actually it's the same physiology, it's the same hormonal system. And so when you are really like in that like love bubble, connected, like sensual space with each other, it actually makes the labor progress, much easier. But what you said was, when you started to verbalize your desires to the practitioner, that's when things got a little like wonky. And that makes sense, right? Because in our society, it's not understood, accepted, honored. Like, sexuality in general isn't very much so on a sacred pedestal as it should be. But as far as childbirth, it's like not even in the picture. So I'm curious about when you were noticing kind of like the shame come up, how did you navigate that, with your partner? How did you navigate that, with the practitioner, or even within yourself, first and foremost?
I think I was more reticent to say anything. It was Theodora that made these suggestions to the midwife. How is it going to be for you if we do this? So I guess I did feel some shame and hesitated, and suddenly there's like a massive abyss between what feels good for us and what we're hoping for, and someone's disapproval or lack of understanding. And when someone gives you that look, they kind of pull away, and like you can feel them. It's like how much time you would need to be with that person, what you'd how it almost seems impossible that you could get someone to a position where they could say, hey, that's really beautiful and I want to be there for you.
It's almost like it's such a moment of profound intimacy that, that the moment of birth, labor and birth, it's such a moment of profound intimacy that if the people that are there aren't all in, it becomes very uncomfortable, like with any moments of intimacy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How did witnessing your son being born, how did it transform you?
I think this, I look back and see two parts. One is the birth itself, the labor and birth, and the immediate aftermath. And then the other one is like a few days later, and I had a moment with my son myself. And for me, that was kind of a rebirth experience. The birth is, witnessing the birth itself. I remember when he finally came, and it was Theodora, she was talking to the baby all the time, like, I love you, Sebastian, and please be gentle with me. And it was so beautiful. I could see she was having this really intense, it looked to me like a very intense experience. It was like something kind of energetically breaking open, like a door in the universe opening and bringing forth something totally new that will transform everything. Nothing will ever be the same again. Like the most important defining moment of my life, I think, being there, witnessing that. And he just kind of suddenly came out, and then Theodora, she had him like within like a second in her arms, and then from then everything was just so gentle and beautiful and kind of quiet and lovely and sensual, and just, the oxytocin flowing.
Yeah.
The doula, Stephanie, she was a beautiful person. She was really feeding into the energy, and we were just all really loved up. And then a few days later, I don't know how many days later, but it was sometime later, I was carrying him in my arms, and I was walking around the living room, trying to get him to sleep. And I found this piece of music by Arvo Pärt called Spiegel im Spiegel. And you'll have to play it after. It's very, very tranquil. And I was playing this music and just walking around the living room with him. And the last time I'd heard this piece of music was in a documentary about classical music. And the host described this piece as the piece that brought melody and beauty back into the world of classical music. And before then, there'd been all this, the 2 world wars, all the composers, they'd gone really intellectual. Everything was like discordant and really heavy and really like, and suddenly there was this like new music, this new, like, it was a rebirth. Like, we can let go of all that stuff now. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm telling you this, by the way. We can let go of all of that, and we can begin again. And suddenly, like, all these things kind of clicked into place, and I was just started weeping. And I felt that I was crying for everything that had been done to me, that I'd experienced in my life as harsh or unfair, all the disappointments, all the frustrations, all the shame, like everything. And I'd been given a chance by the universe to be reborn. And I think for me, that was the really beautiful moment that I'll never forget that.
That is, I feel really emotional listening to you, and I've got a million questions for you. But what I want to reflect back, which is just so stunningly gorgeous, is, we talk a lot in ecstatic birth training about how, in that birthing field, there's expanded flow, there's expanded blood flow, oxygen flow, like energy flow. And sometimes all of that expansion, like physical expansion in the body of the birthing person, like all of that can bring up stuff that's been within the body that, like, maybe, she hadn't thought about or hadn't looked at, or, fears, insecurities, shame is a big one, right? All of that stuff, like it all just kind of comes up. And this massive expansion in energy can be deeply healing also, because there's the mix of the oxytocin in there, and like that's the bonding hormone, right? Like loving hormone. And so I've never really heard it expressed the way you just expressed it, but it was really beautiful, because what I was receiving was, you got that transmission also. You got that like expansion and flow that ultimately brought all of this stuff up that was ready to be cleared. And then within that, you got like this fresh start, as a human on this planet, and now also a father, right, to a child. It's a big, it's no small thing. It's a big, big thing. So profound. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked hearing that, the way that you kind of came back and summarized that. Like, I've thought about this myself. I haven't. It's different when you hear it, and I think one of your phrases about human being on the planet, because for me it feels like a completely individualistic experience.
Yeah.
On the inside, but actually this is out there for many people, and this is a potentiality, and the healing power in these experiences.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's beautiful.
I heard you say the word individualistic, and yeah, of course, we're all like in our own bodies having our own experience, But I found in my experience working with people in birth that there's something incredibly porous about the birthing field. That, you know, that's when a lot of people in birth, they might have transcendent experiences, out of body experiences, otherworldly experiences. There can be these experiences of like being connected to all that is, like the universe. Everyone's experience is obviously different, but I do find that there is this experience of rebirth, and it's so beautiful to hear from you how that translates into fatherhood. Um, I heard you say, I want to go back to something that you said right at the very beginning, which was also really profound, is like, you know, in your life, you're always doing, right? And that this was a moment where you weren't necessarily doing like in that very active way, but you were really supporting and holding space. And I'm curious what that experience was like for you. Was it frightening? Was it like, what was that like?
Well, I didn't just do that. I had been training for several years in Gestalt psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And Gestalt, I don't know how much you know about it, but there's a big focus on the here and now, being with whatever comes up, but being with that, and taking care of yourself, like in the anxiety, you know, to take care of yourself in the moment. So I really felt like I know what to do here, and it's just to be with whatever comes up. And I didn't know what was going to come up, but I felt like I could handle it. So yeah, I remember just feeling very content, just like on the edge of the pool, or I was filling up the pool for a while. So I was doing a few things before, but then, and I had a sleep as well during the labor. And then the doula came and woke me up and said, I think you should wake up now. And I came, and I didn't really do anything. I was just watching.
Yeah.
And it felt easy and good.
Sometimes I hear fathers express that it can be really scary not knowing how to hold that space. So it sounds like with you, it's really beautiful that you've had this kind of training, being in, you know, training to be this Gestalt therapist, that you've had that training within yourself. Because a lot of times I'll have men reflect, or like the women that I'm working with will say, my partner is really nervous, like how, and I don't want to have to worry about taking care of my partner while I'm going through labor. So great that you were so able to be present in that way. And I love when you said that you had this this realization in the moment of birth that like a portal had opened and the world would never be the same, which is exactly that. You know, there's this new being that just came forward, right? There's a whole other presence on the planet. Really, really profound and beautiful. I love how you worded that. I'm curious if there's anything that you haven't shared yet about the birth that you want to before we finish up.
I thought we might talk about like if I had it, what I might say to other men.
Yes, please.
And maybe a bit more about why I wanted to speak, and generally like about why I'm talking. And I now talk to a lot of people about our birth, and I'm very interested, particularly as a practitioner. So that there's kind of that as well. And
yeah, so let's start there. What would you say to other men?
Well, I didn't think about what you just said about kind of men's anxiety and the woman having to kind of be concerned about them in that way. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not really talking to other people at the moment very much about their birth plans, and I'm not kind of involved in that way. But yeah, I think one thing is the anxiety and how we can kind of look inwards and learn to support ourselves.
Yeah.
I've got a whole kind of inner child thing that I can tap into now when I feel anxious or something, or I feel rejected. I see myself as a boy, and I just put my arms around myself and just say like, hey, I'm here, it's okay. So I do that. Yeah, what I was thinking about, maybe this is just isn't just for men, but for women as well. It's for like people who maybe are interested in doing things more themselves and maybe more towards the free birth. Is I know it's kind of seems so scary for so many people. Like it's so highly technological,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like people can't even imagine that you could do that yourself. You need the whole apparatus. So there's
Rescue you.
yeah, so there's a
Yeah.
massive like disempowerment, and you kind of enter this world, this hospital world, and it's kind of done for you. But yeah, I think because what supported me was that I'm very into DIY. I'm a gardener. I can converted a van. I had to learn some basic electrics and even like kind of soldering things, and I was being charged a lot of money to fix one cable in my van for the electrics, and I thought, I'm not going to pay £150. I'm going to do that myself.
Mm-hmm.
So just things that you think you could never do yourself, if you spend a bit of time and you learn how to speak to some people, you're like, oh, and then you do it. It's like, well,
Yeah.
that was easy. And then, okay, what's next? What's the next challenge? So trying to be more self-reliant and tapping into the support out there. And, maybe I want to do this, and resourcing yourself that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the reason why I'm having these conversations about birth, I was having one yesterday with a gardening client. Her daughter had a birth. She had very traumatic 3 days in hospital, and just and I hear this again and again and again and again, and I feel really sad about it, and actually really angry a lot of the time, and maybe that's how it has to be for some people, I don't know, but I feel like people, they're not learning, they don't know it's very, very possible to not have a birth that's traumatic, and it's there, like it's the foundation of all our lives, and it resonates through time into the next generation.
Yeah.
And I know, like a lot of therapists, they talk about the early years, but actually I feel like we need to go back in the therapist world and talking about birth, the pregnancy and the birth. And if you're coming into the world in an atmosphere of fear, anxiety, stress, being numbed up and you not being present to what's happening, and being disempowered, being passive in someone else's, like how are we setting up the next generation? What kind of world will they be creating based on that birth? So I feel very passionate to kind of share what's out there, and especially stuff about like the erectile tissue. I mean, I didn't know about that, and I read in Ina May's book that all the partners who kissed during labor didn't have tearing.
Mm.
I talk to people and they say, oh yeah, I've got this fear, like my partner's really scared of tearing, and this fear is there configuring the field, and they don't know what's possible. And so yeah, I kind of want to be part of the conversation about these things.
I think that's really profound, because what I'm hearing you say is birth is not just a moment in time. Birth is something, the experience of birth reverberates far beyond the moment of the birth itself, both for
Yeah.
the baby being born, for the family as a whole, and also for the generations to come. And I think that's really true, and the science more and more is showing that. And I also think there's a spot where people will put a lot of, like, people that know that can put a lot of pressure on themselves, feeling like they have to get it right. And so I think it's a tricky thing to navigate. I know for myself also, in teaching about ecstatic birth, I'm constantly thinking about this idea of, am I setting people up? Like, am I setting women up? Am I creating a whole other standard that they feel like they have to achieve, or they failed? But when you do know what's possible, when you have seen like the beauty, the transformation, the transcendence, the empowerment on the other side, I feel it's our responsibility to share that. And that's really what I hear you saying. so loud and clear, both as a man, a human being, and as a, you know, a therapist to be, that you see those profound connections and that you're really called to let other people know.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it is, how you've put it. And yeah, clearly, when you express how something could be, there's always the potential for that to be felt as pressure or
Yeah.
judgment if you don't.
Yeah.
Which is something to look at in its own place. But yeah, I do feel we have a responsibility. Uh, yeah, in Gestalt we talk about horizontalism, which is you don't prioritize parts of the different parts of the field. So someone brings like a negative experience, a positive, you don't show favorites, but you honor the whole field. And clearly, like when it comes to birth, a lot of the field is being kind of represented in the media again and again. So, but this bit over here is being missed. You know, I've gone 38 years in my life, and I listen to a lot of things, and I read and I learn, but I didn't know anything about this world, and I should. You know, I've been educated for many years through a system. Why didn't I know that this was possible? You know, I didn't know my mom's own birth story. I didn't know my own birth story. You know, my mom, when she had her first child, she was very young. She was lying in the hospital, kind of drugged, terrified, on her own. She didn't know whether her child was alive or dead, and she was too afraid to ask. And I was talking to her, and she was telling me this, and I could, you know, I do therapy work, and I could tell there was all of this pain inside her, but it's never been able to come out. And I'd never asked about it either, and suddenly it was there, and it was really present. And I wonder how much is this holding us back? So there's a lot of work to do out there, and yeah, I can see that you're doing a lot of that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's why we're here. That's why we're talking. That's why we're having this conversation. I'm so grateful to you for like coming forward and saying, "Hey, like I had an experience too, you know, not just my partner, but I did, and it was really one of the most transformative experiences of my life." And I love how you're saying you just didn't have the information. And I think that's a really big piece of it, not just in birth, but in sexuality in general. And when it comes to women's bodies, I think a lot of this information is just starting to come forward about, you know, like the erectile tissue, that we have as much erectile tissue as, you know, men do. It's just all internal. And, you know, for those of you that don't know, what Phil was referring to is if that erectile tissue is fully engorged in birth, which one of the ways you can do that is through sexual pleasure, kissing, then it's much more pliable. You're less likely to rip. And so this is really our design, that the design of our bodies is that pleasure is actually a part of the process of not just conceiving the baby, but of labor and delivery and beyond as well, right? You know, we have women that will experience orgasmic pleasure while breastfeeding, and they feel deeply ashamed because they feel like they're doing something wrong, something inappropriate. But this is their biological body. Actually, this is our design. You're having those pleasurable sensations because it's stimulating oxytocin flow in your body. And then you're gazing at your baby and you're falling even more deeply in love with this being who needs you to survive, you know, in these early years. So I'm really grateful to you for coming forward. This was such a beautiful conversation. You had such profound insights and reflections and really gave us a lot to think about. Thank you, Phil. Is there anything else you want to share before we close?
I could talk for a long time. I think this feels like a really good place
Yeah.
to finish. And I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope it won't be the last time.
Yeah, me too. I've really enjoyed this. And I feel like those of us that have really witnessed what's possible and are feeling you use the words like, why didn't I know? And for me, that was exactly how I felt when I had my ecstatic birth experience. I was preparing for pleasurable birth, and still what I experienced transcended all of that. And I very similarly came out going, why didn't I know? Here I was educating myself. I was preparing for this kind of experience that I could sort of conceive of in my head. And what I experienced went way beyond that. And so like that activating moment of like, why didn't I know? And other people should know. Let's get this out there. I'm so grateful that, you know, you're in it with us, and that you're talking to people, and that the movement is really, really spreading, because I think it is important. And I think it is ultimately, when you think about, God, there's so much wrong on this planet. There's so much that needs to be healed. And when you go right to the root of it, as you so beautifully expressed, when you can go right to that moment and see the profound importance of how a being comes into the world and how it reverberates out, you start to feel like, hey, like this actually might be the medicine that we need for the future of this planet. So I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much for coming today and sharing your experience with us. It was really, really beautiful and really touching.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sheila. Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
All right, and for those of you that are watching this, whether live or on replay, Teodora was actually part of the Ecstatic Birth practitioner training for a full year while she was pregnant, and gave birth while part of that. So a lot of the information, a lot of the body training that we talked about today happened within the Ecstatic Birth community, within the support of an incredible community of practitioners really holding space for the highest outcome in birth. We learned from some of the top leaders and visionaries on the planet when it comes to women's sexuality, when it comes to childbirth, when it comes to female pleasure. So I'm going to put the links that we're currently enrolling for the next round of the practitioner training. I'll put the links down below if you want to check it out, and feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions. So goodbye for today. Thank you so much for watching.